I think a CMO's job when it comes to quote unquote running the speakers program is that it has to be a program or a strategy. It's not a
Yeah.
bunch of random
Yeah.
gigs, right?
Great point.
So, there's a who, what, when, where, why with the messaging. There's a follow up. Is this lead generation? Who's speaking? How do they speak? Are we building credibility? Is it building the brand in the right way? All these things. So if speaking is a channel,
Right.
what's the goal?
Hello, and welcome to the Misadventures in Marketing podcast, presented by the American Marketing Association San Francisco chapter. I'm Steve Haney, a fractional go-to-market executive in Silicon Valley.
And I'm Peter Farago, a marketing executive in the Bay Area. Each week, Steve and I come together to talk about all things in high-tech marketing.
We share our own experiences running marketing teams with a special focus on technology startups, where we've succeeded, where we failed, what worked and what didn't. And periodically, we invite our CMO friends and other marketing colleagues onto the show to, share their points of view, and hopefully we can impart some wisdom along the way. By the way, we should share that the Misadventures in Marketing team actually got together in person for the first time.
Yeah, it's an actual group of people. Yeah.
Everybody, no bots. Everybody was actually a human, and made delightful Christmas treats and delicious savory dishes. And it was great to be together IRL, as the kids say, and celebrate our first year doing this podcast, which is kind of crazy to think it's been a little over a year now. So anyway, listen. So I think we got a cool topic today. We're going to do our news segments and AI segments first, and then we will talk about speaking, either doing that at conferences, doing that as a CMO, everything around what it means to get up in front of a group of people, why you do it, when you do it, what messages you're trying to impart. But before we do that, the relevant tech news of the day, as far as I'm concerned, is OpenAI's Code Red initiative, I believe they've been calling it, due to the fact that Gemini and I guess all their competitors have been gaining on them. And what I keep wondering about OpenAI is, are they going to get slacked? And, I often point to the fact that Slack discovered this new category as a startup, which was internal corporate communications, messaging, and they were just taken off with it. And then Microsoft popped up at all these Fortune 500 companies and said, well, why are you paying extra for that? You already get Teams as part of your Microsoft 365 subscription. Just use Teams. And before you know it, Slack had to sell itself to Salesforce to survive. And in my opinion, that's happening right now, particularly with Google, to a certain extent, also with Microsoft 365, where they've got these chat bots built in. And I guess the only question really is do you have to be AI native? For established companies, new technologies are just a new feature. Whereas if you're a startup in the area, it's all kind of like brand new open space where you don't have the legacy of traditional software weighing you down. If it's the latter case, then OpenAI has a great chance to win this. But if it's not, if these generative LLMs are just another feature that you add on to what you've already got, then I kind of think they're toast. So anyway, I found that whole story fascinating.
All right. Well, the tech news I think is interesting is coming out in New York. They signed legislation that requires advertising to conspicuously disclose when they use AI generated synthetic performers. So if you're using an AI actor or someone who looks like an actor that's AI, you have to show a disclosure that that's a synthetic performer. Just like I think in, the parallel probably is like, these are paid actors or something when you see a commercial. I
Oh,
think
that
it's
makes
similar to
sense.
that. Yeah. And then the other part of it is that you have to separately, if you're using a deceased person's name, image, or likeness, you also have to get consent for that.
AI and
Yeah.
how I've been using AI this week. Mine's pretty mundane, but super, super productivity enhancer is again in Gemini. As you know, that's kind of my main bot that I use in Google Sheets, using it to clean up large databases that are in Google Sheets. Right. I mean, you and I know it's people just use spreadsheets for databases, right? And you have all this data in there, and you'll import things from .csv files and whatnot, and if you have to get that data and use it somewhere, etc., and you want to clean everything up, it's always tedious work. This is what I got my $150,000 MBA for, was to go and spend time cleaning up spreadsheets and doing data entry. Um, the new tools within Google Sheets using Gemini make cleaning up large, data sets so easy, and formatting them and making them clean and checking the integrity of the data. And I just did this recently for a project that I'm working on, and it was like, I don't know, 4,000 entries in a Google Sheet that I just needed to make consistent and clean up, get the date format correct and in the way I wanted it. And just a fantastic tool.
Yeah, so my tip is a good segue, I think, into today's discussion for the podcast episode. But one way I use ChatGPT in similar ways for written and speaking related narratives is the following. I'll take an outline that I had, and I kind of think of ChatGPT as my like talk coach, or something, rehearsal partner even. And so I will take some thoughts I have about themes and a topic. Let's say the presentation is about, I don't know, like how AI automation is going to change, marketing departments, org charts. I mean, I'm just making up a topic off the top of my head here. And I say, oh, well, there's a bunch of things I think about. And I dump that into like kind of a stream of consciousness thing. That's the best way. I think you should definitely control the input into the LLM and then get the output. But I think of it as, okay, let me ask it to turn this into a structured flow. Like I might call that a story spine, or, I might say, hey, take this, my audience is the following. I'm talking about this. Here's some thoughts I have about it. And turn this into like a 5-beat story spine for me, and maybe give me 2 opening hooks and a 1-sentence takeaway. So, my point is to like ask it to help you kind of streamline and organize. If you have to give a presentation and it's got like, I don't know, I think there's a rule of thumb about, what is it, 1 minute per slide. So let's say you have 5 minutes. There's not going to be any Q&A. I might say, okay, I need 4 slides, and I need to have it break down the following way. So I'll use it like that. Then once, let's say you've developed your story, you can say, okay, now pretend, let's say you have a Q&A to this, maybe it's 5 prezzo and 10 minutes discussion. Say, ask me the 10 most likely and toughest questions I'll get. You might even say, skeptical but fair. Basically start making FAQ, or like we anticipate Q&A, so that I can say, okay, here's the topic. Here is it broken down into 3, 4, 5 story points, and then maybe opening hook, conclusion, then anticipating the next step. And I do this in steps. I wouldn't give it to it all at once. I would give it like the raw material for the story. We get the story down. Then I'd say, okay, now pretend you're the audience and we're having Q&A and I want skeptical but fair questions. Let's pick the top 10. And then I can go back and forth and I can maybe practice those. I will say, there are some pretty cool AI tools out there that where you could actually practice speaking. One that I found, and on my own LinkedIn, I'm listed as an advisor. I think it's a pretty lightweight relationship. So I'm not plugging them. I don't get any money out of this. But there's a pretty good product called Yoodli, Yoodli. And it's gone through a few incarnations, but basically it will allow you to practice live like this, speaking, and it will, transcribe it and give you feedback, or it will give you questions and it'll show up on the screen as like, answer this, and it gives you a bunch of tips around like how long you took. It'll count that kind of thing. So there are actually now speaking practice partners in terms of AI out there. So I might also do that.
This episode of Misadventures in Marketing is brought to you by the American Marketing Association, San Francisco. AMASF is a member-run organization that has been serving the Bay Area marketing community for over 80 years. Through programs, events, workshops, and discussions that introduce the latest trends and developments in the industry, to networking events that bring together the best marketing minds in the region, AMASF diligently works to foster professional learning and career advancement opportunities for all of its members. Joining is easy. To become a member of AMASF, go to amasf.org. That's amasf.org, and click on Get Involved on the top menu, then become a member. For just $199 a year, you'll get access to events, resources, credentialed learning opportunities, and a community of fellow marketers who will help you expand your network and advance your career. The AMASF membership, the investment you make for the career you love. Peter, we are going to talk about public speaking in all aspects of a CMO's life and their work, not just speaking about yourself at conferences, say, or industry trade shows, but also setting up speeches, working with other members of the executive management team for their speaking engagements, and how you craft a message, what your objectives are, the best way to go about it. And I was wondering, maybe as we're looking through this very broad topic, set up speaking engagements and crafting messages for speaking engagement, we could start off with, our own personal methodologies and philosophies when we get called to speak.
This is about like you're in charge of a set of activities and a budget and a strategy to grow a company, to build awareness and interest, and conferences and speaking as part of the sometimes the earned media channel. There's a sponsorship approach to it as well. But I think a CMO's job when it comes to quote unquote running the speakers program is that it has to be a program or a strategy. It's not a bunch of random gigs, right?
Great point.
So, there's a who, what, when, where, why with the messaging. There's a follow-up. Is this lead generation? Who's speaking? How do they speak? Are we building credibility? Is it building the brand in the right way? All these things. So if speaking is a channel, what's the goal? One way to frame it, maybe for our listeners, is that we are a B2B SaaS company. I mean, we're AI native, but think of it as B2B. We have a recently hired VP of sales who's got a strong background in this. He's very good. And, he and I both know events generally, just from rule of thumb from our experience. We're like, events need to be part of, how we're going to market. It's going to make a big difference. And in our industry, there are a set of conferences that matter. I think where like the vendors and the people in the ecosystem go. So at least the first step is like, okay, where do we need to be? Where are we going to find our buyers, basically, right? And so, so that's like step one, is laying down, I guess, the conference speaking track. And then, I would say kind of as a serendipitous outcome of thinking about conference speaking, I like to lay that down as one of the first things on the calendar, like to look at like, hey, in Berlin in summer, there's a huge conference around such and such a tech that we probably need to be at, and then in the fall of next year in San Francisco, there'll be this or there'll be, so just kind of looking at like the calendar, because the calendar can drive like product, you might be moving your product shipping against that. You might be having a big speak. We start talking about them as tent poles is the slang, I think, internally as marketers. But, there's some tent pole events that create kind of the spine of the marketing calendar and also maybe a product release calendar, but also become an important way to help sales connect with folks that could result in advancing the sale. So that could be anyone from someone new you're meeting to somebody you're talking to, and then trying to think about the different ways to, if you have a high-end dinner that isn't a speaking program, but is part of like going to a conference, right? So the first thing I do is think of that. The second thing is highly related. I like a thought leadership approach to marketing in companies. I tend to work in category creation and things that are new that are better ways to do what we used to do. So then you end up having to do a lot of education and thought leadership anyway. But having a strong point of view and some people call it messaging tracks, but I just think of it as like some bigger ideas, um, that you need to develop. And the reason is that when you go to a conference, we're going to get into speaking now, at least in my mind. What you really want to do is place your CEO or somebody relevant on stage and have them addressing the audience. The credibility you get from being a speaker at an event in the quote unquote earn side of the plan, versus paying a pay to play. I paid for a breakout room sponsorship. That's not as credible, right? So I like to go to a conference with the halo of having some thought leadership, public speaking. And, you build credibility, you can control a narrative, you can frame like the industry or how things are changing or trends. When you do that, though, then your story it's not a product demo anymore, right? You're not talking about your company and it's a widget that like makes your grass greener, being banal on purpose, but you're not pitching your product. And you're having to talk about a bigger trend. Think sort of somewhere between a TED Talk and something else is thought provoking. So when you're running this program, your speaker program as part of the mix, or your conference track as part of the mix, the idea is like it's going to generate a certain amount of leads, it's going to lead to a certain amount of business, it's going to build perceptions and associations we care about with our brand. It's going to get us out there in the world. We want to be in the consideration set for lots of potential buyers who are going to go into procurement for our kind of thing. So it's about being known, and you exist. If they don't know you exist, they can't choose you, right? Brand familiarity matters. So there's all those pieces, but when it really comes down to it, it's like I've got certain places we need to be. They're going to be in different cities at different times of the year, and we're going to be talking about certain big ideas in the industry and maybe evolutions of our product. And I need a certain bench, number of speakers who are going to speak about things. So it's like who speaks where about what and why, and what do we want those outcomes to be? That's what I'm saying is the framing. And you as the marketer often have to speak, but you also have a different kind of responsibility to think about the total sum of all your company's
Right.
speaking
Well,
efforts. And who
exactly.
speaks and why,
Exactly. Who
and what
speaks
those
and why? And
goals
that's the
are.
context. I mean, my feeling has always been certainly nobody wants to hear from a CMO or a VP of sales at most conferences. They want to hear from the co-founders. They want to hear from the product guys. They do not want to hear from the flacks, so to speak, who are trying to sell something. That being said, there are certain conferences. I mean, this was not a trade show. This was definitely a conference of very intense buyers, very small group. This was kind of as part of this like 2-day conference, they had a Shark Tank thing where there was no real money involved, but it was these early stage startups getting up and doing their thing. And our VP of sales got invited to that. And it was all pretty much, sales guys there to present a business that this faux Shark Tank. My point being is that, yeah, this is my feeling. 80%, 90% of the time, it should be the people with the product and the industry knowledge. You definitely don't want sales and marketing guys getting up there unless it's very specifically targeted towards that group and they request for the sales and marketing guys to come and speak. I will say, though, about going back, and we can move on from this topic, about personal preparation, and you touched on this, is just practice, 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 being prepared. I have to stick to a script. I cannot wing a presentation. I have to be very locked down, and then I usually practice like 2-3 days before I ever get on stage. Otherwise, it will just kind of fly apart and won't land a punch. So I just think that's critical. And of course, whenever you're working with other members of the executive management team, have to go on asking them, begging them to please practice, put together something very tight. Let me and the PR people work with you to give you input on the deck. That's all just so critical.
This episode of Misadventures in Marketing is brought to you by Peakbound Studio, the Bay Area video production house for high-impact marketing videos. Online video is quickly becoming the universal language of business and the primary medium through which marketers speak to their prospects. According to Forbes and market research firm Statista, 90% of all businesses are currently using online video in their marketing. And in 2025, 85% of those businesses will increase their spending in online video over last year. Enter Peakbound Studio. Peakbound Studio is not just another video production team. They are storytellers, visual artists, and high-tech experts rolled into one. They manage everything from the initial concept to the final edit. Your online video presence has to be responsive, vibrant, and constant to get the attention of prospects and spread your message into every corner of the marketplace. Peakbound makes sure your messages are unique, compelling, and pop in today's attention-scarce world. So whether you need brand storytelling, customer testimonials, corporate videos, or short-form social media content, Peakbound delivers videos that don't just look good, they work. Learn more at www.peakbound.studio. That's www.peakbound.studio. Peakbound Studio, the video production house that puts your online video to work.
But let me like say three things that frame this strategically, the bigger picture of why you should think of speaking as a channel. So especially in B2B. So the first point is that thought leadership as a general approach influences vendor evaluation, right? So B2B decision makers who might be buying your stuff are always consuming thought leadership, and all the surveys and the feedback says that that's a much more trustworthy basis for assessing a company than just looking at marketing materials and product sheets. So the first thing is that thought leadership, how you think about framing the way the world is changing and how maybe your technology or a type of technology is like, how is AI making companies more efficient? I might want to know that as an executive who's in charge of using this new potential automation magical thing. We know the thought leadership changes buying behavior, not just awareness. So it can influence them, right? If you are giving them research offerings that they weren't previously considering, like I'm adding new data to the mix. We talked to 100 B2B decision makers about how are they going to implement AI into the enterprise and for what reasons or something. And that would be very useful, right? So, and then I'd say the other thing too, and I mentioned this earlier, is that events are treated as a pipeline channel, not just brand, but demand, right? So I think eMarketer is saying 60% of B2B marketers say that in-person events are an effective lead generation tactic. So framing the event participation around speaking, do we speak in the measurable ROI and pipeline outcomes is part of it. And that's why sales folks, you've said this many times, really like to be at conferences. They know that they can meet and influence the people who might buy the product. And they want to do that with credibility, right? They want to do that, not just showing up and having your logo on the lanyard, but they want to come to the event and have the potential buyer know who our company is and what we stand for and why we're different and better and all those things. Speaking isn't just about getting up and wowing an audience in a one-off way. It is going to be an important channel in your total strategy.
We were talking about panels as well as being a kind of speaking opportunity, and whether you're moderating the panel, and it may even be the CMO moderating the panel, or you're sitting on a panel, that's also a speaking opportunity, right? And the ability to get your thought leadership out there and state your point of view, and certainly in the mix with other industry leaders who may be on stage is, another way of doing it.
Thing I would say is when you start to speak or get on speaking track, while you want to be the ones who are getting some credibility and authority by being part of the group who's teaching the audience, talking to the audience, managing the discussion around topics for the audience. The most important thing for the organizer that you have to start pivoting to in your head is you have to help them drive ticket sales. You have to help them compel the audience to feel like they learned something. So your job then is to not please, but to challenge or elucidate or guide or something with the audience. It's all about the audience. Like a conference person driving a competent program is not just looking for sponsorship dollars. And what I'll say generally is I'm also talking about, and this sometimes you have to really be careful, talking about things that are earned speaking placements, not pay to play. You can go to a conference and you can drop, like AWS reInvent. We heard of a company in our space, did the diamond sponsors for $750,000. They got 2 speaking slots for that, and they got their logo here, XYZ. But that's part of the greater event conference track and the budget and the things you can do when you get there. I'm talking about being a thought leader and getting slotted into the ways main stage is talking about topics to the audience. That's what
Incredibly
I'm
valuable,
and that's very valuable.
Depending upon how hot the conference is, incredibly rare because it's such premium talk time. I mean, if it's going to be like TechCrunch Disrupt or Dreamforce, a small startup is probably not going to get those. But if it's some niche industry conference, then it's much easier to get that. So we should probably talk a little bit about first-party events versus third-party events, because I think probably most people have in mind these third-party events and conferences that you're invited to or you're trying to get a speaking slot at, trade shows, conferences. But the reality is there are also a lot of first-party events where you're either inviting partners to attend. Let's say it's a business channel opportunity, or developers. You and I have done a bunch of developer marketing at developer tool companies. I got invited to a small company sponsored channel. And again, you and I were there, Peter, in the early mobile days. You remember this. And it was about the platforms coming out for mobile app developers and where they stood. This was a small gathering. There were about 4 of us on the panel, and it was being moderated by the company that was holding it, because they were part of a mobile infrastructure thing that they were doing. And, and I would say there, I don't know, 75 people in the audience, all the mobile developers. And, this was a thing. It's like, which client platform to develop for? How do you think about this? What are the dynamics? And the guy who was developing for the iPhone, which again was a revelation. It was amazing. It was revolutionary. But I'm coming in as the guy who was talking about these older platforms that were still viable, still way bigger than the iPhone. I mean, the iPhone App Store, the iPhone had been out for only a year or so. The App Store had only been out for a few months. But obviously, there was a lot of excitement and momentum around it because, one guy in a garage could produce an app and just get it on a mobile device. And this created a lot of tension. Right. And so my point being is that when you're sitting on these panels and you're trying to deliver a message or become part of a discussion, it can be a difficult way in which to um, do thought leadership. You've got conflicting point of views, especially at this time when the mobile development world was in a bit of flux. And maybe that's what I'd like your thoughts on. It's like, okay, you're going to go sit on a panel, you're going to be contributing a point of view. The example I was bringing up was, it wasn't contentious, but it was a lot going on at the industry at the time that didn't make for great discussion. Let's put it that way. Because there were a lot of people, me included, who were kind of resentful and bitter about the situation with the debts that the carriers kept on their phones. And then, you had guys like this young independent developer who just found this great sense of freedom that he could just throw an app up on an iPhone, which was a gorgeous platform, and make some money. What are your thoughts about going on to a panel and, for lack of a better term, succeeding? Like, or what should your objectives be? What should we be trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I mean, it depends how the panel's prep. Typically, like if I'm moderating a panel, we'll have maybe at least one, possibly two prep sessions. And so we do get a sense for what questions we might be asking or being responsible if you're on the panel to answer. What I would say is have a strong point of view about things people care about. So like in that case, we had a monopoly where there were one or two big buyers that everyone had to sell to, and that was a distribution choke point. So like getting your mobile application accepted by a carrier, because AT&T and T-Mobile and Verizon and those guys were controlling the digital distribution pre-app store. There's a lot of money and there's a lot of hassle, and a lot of times you'd care about like, well, how do I stand out? How do I get people to buy? Like how do I win in that scenario? And then, you have an alternate distribution channel coming out with the App Store on iTunes, the iPhone platform. So then it's like, well, where should I put my energy? Should I put my energy, what's the breakdown of revenue? So I might be, if someone's talking about App Store is the next greatest thing, I might say, that's true, but I think that the audience, has to recognize that 80% of revenue is still being driven on other platforms. So, you can try to win on in this new emerging channel, but the reality is today that you're not going to make it. You're not going to make it. And so we could talk about tips and tricks and tactics for getting onto the App Store and why maybe it's a good place to test things easily or or whatever, but it's not really where the money's made. It's not where competition lies. So like I would want to have strong points of view about the dynamics of the industry, the positions to take, and have that map back to what people care about, the business decisions they need to make. Where should I invest sales time? Where should I invest building out product versions for this place or that place? Like these are important questions people care about when they go back from the conference to the job. They want to be able to say in a meeting, we're prioritizing X, Y, and Z platforms first, and in an experimental test, whatever category, we're putting, say, the App Store. Some people might say, well, I'm going to do it now and I'm going to try, because I'm just entering and I think this is going to be a growth area. So I'm going to grow with the channel and it's a good entry point for me. Or some people who are more established might say, okay, I may or may not support that right away based on what you said on stage. I think about everything comes back to what the audience cares about and then also the position you have and how credible it is. And I would not, some people have some flair and some style about how they do it. I think a good thing to think about, maybe even wrapping up this episode, is have a strong point of view and have it backed by something credible and be willing to stand up and insert it. That is what the audience also wants: a fight. The audience wants a challenge. you do want to challenge things, and other speakers, there are different levels of sophistication. Some panel folks are just trying to like push their agenda, and they're saying things that help their business. So they're saying, oh, well, I really want to do, everyone should care about the App Store. Oh, why? Well, because I'm the company that helps you get your product on that store, right?
Okay, Peter, I'm going to read us out then. We want to thank you, our audience, for listening. Our editors, Lorenzo Fernandez-Kopek at Peakbound Studio and Brian Douglas at the Creative Commonwealth, for making us sound and look great. Our marketing maven, Ian Robinson Lambert, for getting the word out. Julianne Bernalis for being our consulting producer. Renita Dada for driving our market research and content calendar. And of course, Thomas Moyer, president of AMA San Francisco, for presenting this podcast. Would also like to thank our sponsor, Workbox, for their support of Misadventures in Marketing.